Hello, good afternoon, good day, good morning, everybody. In today's, or I guess this short little video right now, there's a couple of moving parts for today and for the week, but in this specific video, I'm going to be quickly running through a couple of different tools and techniques that you can use when you're building your policy speech in order to have a really effective and persuasive argument overall. So if you remember last week, we went over a lot of those different components that make policy persuasion really difficult, as well as a couple of some broad strategies and considerations in order to write a really persuasive argument. So for this week, we're going to kind of take that a step further and actually talk about what are the moving parts of an argument more generally, and then also what are some specific components that you should have when talking about a policy issue and a policy solution. So if there's one thing that you should take away from SPCM 200, it's that communication studies really likes using triangles as part of its models. And so today we're going to talk about something called the argument triangle, which really what this means is that there are three parts that every strong argument should have. You should have a claim, evidence, and analysis. And so by that, your claim is really just, your clear, persuasive statement. Here's what I want people to believe. Your evidence to support, illustrate, and make clear that claim. But the most important component is that third part, which is that analysis, making sure that you have some sort of an explanation that connects that evidence to your claim and puts it together for you and your audience. What I have found, not just for public speaking, but for writing in general, is that most people are really good at coming up with a clear claim and supporting it with evidence, but it's that third component, the analysis, which often falls a little flat and can undercut an argument and its effectiveness. So not only for public speaking, but for also really any argument, any writing that you ever do, whether it's for school or even beyond in your career, thinking about this argument triangle, the claim, the evidence, and the analysis will hopefully be really beneficial for all of you. So I'm going to talk about each component a little more in detail and give us an example of it as well. So like I said, our claim is really just kind of like whatever argument overall that I'm trying to make. Here's like the one statement that I'm trying to persuade my audience to believe. So as an example, what I have here right now, I might say, Elon Musk is actually more worried about his public image than actually helping to support the healthcare system. So that's a claim, that's an argument that I have to make. If I just say that on its own, you might not believe me. Like, who am I to make this argument? What am I actually talking about? What evidence do I have to support that? So even though we have claim as kind of like the first part of the triangle, you need these other two components to support it and actually make it kind of come together as one strong, cohesive argument. So if my claim is about why Elon Musk really only cares about his public image, doesn't actually want to help with the healthcare system, I could bring in a couple of different pieces of evidence. So for instance, I can say Elon Musk recently donated several thousand CPAP machines to a local hospital in order to help COVID-19. Each of those boxes that he donated had a big Tesla logo on it. And so that's clear evidence. There's not really dispute about it. Like, it is a fact that this happened. There's photographic evidence of it, plenty of news reports about it. So if I were actually doing this in a speech, of course I would have an oral citation. So according to the New York Times, Elon Musk donated X number of CPAP machines, whatever the case may be. So that information, those facts and figures, and that narrative, that is a specific piece of evidence that I can use to supposedly, hopefully support that claim that I'm making. However, if I only have a claim and the evidence for it, that's only two pieces of this triangle, and those two alone aren't going to actually support a cohesive argument. So in addition to claim and evidence, I also need that third component, my analysis. And that's what I'm going to do as a speaker or as a writer to connect my evidence and my claim. So in this Elon Musk example, I'm going to have to explain why that evidence matters. And so CPAP machines are actually not as effective as ventilators for treating COVID-19. And so the fact that he is, one, giving us ineffective medical equipment, and two, including a large Tesla logo on it, this suggests that he's not actually worried about supporting the healthcare system, but instead is actually more worried about the publicity or, kind of his public image. So together, the claim, the evidence, and the analysis, those all work together to make an overall persuasive argument. And this happens at every level of your argument as well. So remember, you have your main argument in your entire speech or your piece of writing. That's going to be your thesis statement, your one central claim. So you should have multiple pieces of evidence and analysis to support that. But then even within the speech itself, so each main point will also probably have evidence and analysis too to support those claims. The other thing I will also point out is that for an individual claim, it doesn't necessarily have to be one piece of evidence to one claim. In fact, it's probably stronger if you have, here's my one claim and here's 3 or 4 pieces of evidence and a bunch of analysis to tie it all together. Any claim that you're making in your speech, or really this, like I said, this isn't just for public speaking, this kind of applies to all of writing in general. Any claim that you're making, you need to have evidence and analysis to support it, and in order to kind of make everything persuasive and convincing to the audience. So these kind of apply to all of persuasion more generally. And so now what I want to do is kind of shift gears a little bit and talk about some specific components that are going to be specific to policy arguments. So as a reminder, any policy argument, such as the one you're going to be making in your next speech assignment, is going to be anything that is describing any public issue, and then you're going to suggest or propose a solution and tell us why that solution is the best option for that policy. In order to be most persuasive in your policy argument, you need to have 3 components: your need, plan, and practicality. And so this is kind of one of those reasons that we talked about last week, that policy argument specifically is so difficult. In addition to having to make a clear and cohesive argument with claims, evidence, and analysis, you need to have a cohesive policy that talks about needs, plan, and practicality. So in order to be most persuasive in your speech itself, you need to be able to describe the public issue, describe your policy, and then connect that policy solution to the issue. So I'm going to quickly run through these 3 components, and then if we were in class, we would have a chance to discuss, but then hopefully that gives you a broad enough overview, and then of course you're always welcome to ask me questions. So your need, that's kind of the first part. That's the public issue. That's the problem. What's the current deficiency? So you need to tell us what's wrong and why it's wrong. So you need to demonstrate that there's a problem in society and concisely tell us that it exists. So what is the issue? Who is this issue affecting? And how badly are they affected by this issue? So for instance, if there's let's say a global hunger crisis, which there is a global hunger crisis, the severity of that issue and who it's affecting is going to be very different than, say, the Fort Collins public transportation, the schedule doesn't serve everyone equally. Both of them are societal problems, but setting the proper stakes about who's affected and how badly are they affected is going to set up your argument for your policy after that. In your policy speech, you want to spend the majority of your time focusing on the actual solution. So when you're talking about the need, you want to be concise. Tell us what's wrong, who it's affecting, but don't necessarily feel like you have to spend the majority of your speech saying that everything is wrong. The bulk of a policy argument should be in the next part, which is the plan itself. So how are we going to actually respond to this need? What is the policy solution? This is really kind of the meat and potatoes, the big chunk for the policy speech. You want to be as specific as possible, so don't just give us a broad idea of someone should do something about this. As the speaker, you want to give us, this is a clear solution and this is why this solution is the best option. Part of that includes talking about some specific details, including enforcement and responsibility. So don't just tell us that, here's what I think should be changed. Tell us how that would actually happen. Who would be responsible for making that change? Talk about costs. This includes monetary costs, of course, but also what other things do we have to give up to get this policy? For instance, is it going to cost, someone's going to have to take the time to implement the policy? Is it going to take more space? So a common policy that I like to think about is parking on the CSU campus. I think that the current policies and the current situation not working at all. They need to expand the parking options. But in order to do that, it's going to cost some actual money, but we might also cost some space. We might have to give up some space on campus to build more parking lots. Those would all be the types of things that get incorporated in the costs. So after you're talking about the plan, you want to be as detailed as possible, and this is where you should be spending the bulk of the time of your policy speech. However, the need and the plan on its own, not really enough to be convincing to the audience. You need that third component, which is the practicality. So in addition to telling us there is an issue and I have a solution, you want to make sure that you tell us that your solution is the best practical option. Tell us that your proposed policy is the best case scenario for us. This is why we need to use it. So one, you want to make sure that you clearly identify that your proposed policy actually addresses the problem. Does the plan solve the need? And this is also where you're going to talk about any disadvantages or counter arguments. So like I mentioned last week, there is no such thing as a perfect policy. It either doesn't fully solve the problem, doesn't go far enough, or might cost certain things for everyone. In your speech, you want to talk about those disadvantages and counter arguments and make sure to tell us, here's what we have to give up, but here's why that's still worthwhile overall. I will point out, I've lumped together disadvantages and counter arguments in both this video and also last week's. The two are slightly different, even though they do sound the same. So you can think of any counter argument, we'll start there. A counter argument is any alternative option that someone might bring up. So maybe I have this proposed policy solution about the CSU parking on campus, and I want to say, my plan is that we just get rid of all of the athletics buildings and replace them all with parking garages. A counter argument would be probably someone from athletics saying like, no, we should actually not get rid of the stadium, not get rid of the basketball arena, and instead we should expand the parking garage somewhere else. Because it's an alternative option or an alternative policy, that would be a counter argument. A disadvantage, conversely, is anything that's going to be a direct cost of the policy. So whether that's monetary, space, labor, anything like that, a disadvantage is what do we have to give up in order to get this new policy? And then in your discussion of practicality, you need to make the case that despite these disadvantages, all the advantages of this proposed policy solution still outweigh those needs, still outweigh those disadvantages. And so in a policy speech, you should make sure that you're addressing your need, your plan, and the practicality. In another video coming up, we're going to talk about some different organizational strategies, how to, once you've identified the need, the plan, and the practicality, what are some of the best ways to specifically organize those in a speech in order to make a cohesive argument. All right, so I just want to wrap up with a quick example of what this might look like with a real policy in an actual situation. So a potential need, so I'm demonstrating that there is a problem, is that communication studies faculty and staff have reported an increasing workload and with that a growing level of stress. And so this is a clear need. The stress is being driven by whatever these workload factors are, and I'm clear about who it's affecting, which is communication studies faculty and staff. So once I've talked about my need, I'm going to offer a policy solution. So my proposed policy solution, and if you can tell, this was written before we were doing online teaching, but perhaps my proposed policy is that we change the office rules to allow all our faculty and staff to bring even non-service animals into the workplace. So basically we're allowed to have an office dog or an office cat. In my proposed plan here, I'm also being specific about how this would kind of work. So I might say, well, all employees are going to be responsible for their own animals and their actions. So it's not a free-for-all. We're going to allow animals in the office, but there's going to still be certain parameters on it. In my policy speech, this would be the bulk of where I'm spending most of my time. I also need to talk about why allowing pets is going to solve the stress issue. So this is going to be that practicality component. So pets can have a lot of benefits, and they really help reduce stress and anxiety. And because many faculty and staff already have their own pets, the university isn't going to necessarily have to pay a lot of money to implement this. Additionally, because the policy is going to be written to specifically protect the department and university from liabilities, we're not necessarily opening ourselves up to extra issues there. So I have my need about growing stress. I have my proposed plan, which is allow animals in the office, and I've talked about my practicality of why allowing animals is going to help address our stress issues. Because I have all those three components, it's a pretty cohesive policy argument, and if I were to actually use this topic, I would obviously expand upon each of those points and organize them to make a clear argument. For your policy speeches, you want to make sure that you can succinctly summarize both your need, all these components, the need, the plan, and the practicality. If you're finding that any of those three parts for your policy speech are a little hard to clearly define, you probably need to refine the topic a little bit more in order to make a really effective argument. Throughout your speech, whether that's working on the topic proposal, working on the research, or working on the actual speech itself, it's important to keep all these components in mind. So the need, the plan, and the practicality of your policy, but then also the claim, the evidence, and the analysis of the overall argument. Thinking about all these components is really going to help you, one, write a cohesive speech that meets the assignment requirements, but two, and I think most importantly, make a really effective argument and will hopefully serve you well, not just for this class, but also any other future writing that you'll do. As always, if there are questions, comments, concerns about any of this, please don't hesitate to reach out either via email, leave a comment on the discussion post, or try to meet me during my virtual office hours as well. All right, until next time, take care.